Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm very happy that we are here and that the room is almost crowded, which is a good sign on Friday morning, which, let's be honest, is the middle of the night in the university dynamics. My name is Małgorzata Bakalarz, and I have a pleasure, together with Susan Yelavich, to be one of the co-organizers of this symposium. But I have even bigger pleasure to be here tonight, today and tonight and tomorrow as a member of the audience, because I'm really excited and very much looking forward to our gathering, given how lucky we are with a wonderful lineup of all our panelists. We were talking with Susan and with other panelists before that when we started working on this symposium and on the bigger project, which I'm going to talk about in a second, we thought that we felt an urge to respond to the current and very timely phenomena that we have to deal with these days in the world we live in. That was a year and a half ago. I don't think we expected how timely and current this conversation is going to become. I'm not sure if I like this exercise of prophecy. Next time we're going to think twice before we start. But I'm glad that we're all here and that we actually are having this conversation, and we have been getting out of our respective disciplines, not to hide behind them, but to actually include them in a bigger picture, in a more complex and nuanced, hopefully, conversation about wounded places. I just want to say one word about the fact that today's symposium is a central part to the larger project of reflection around spatially defined challenges and opportunities of today's world. For the last 2 weeks, we have been admiring, I guess, or interacting with an exhibition, which is called Far Away From Where, and it's right outside our auditorium, all the way to the back at Aronson Gallery, which is a different take on the topic, maybe more focusing on the artist's responses to the distances, the emotional and physical occasionally, but emotional, political, psychological distances that we have towards wounded places, and it's a complex attempt to approach these places and to sort of feed off of this struggle to get closer. Today we are starting the symposium in which we more think about strategies and approaches and attempts to make oneself at home in wounded places. We will be talking about what it means to make oneself at home. We'll be talking about wounded places and in their different layers and different types, if you will. And in 2 weeks, we are going with 10 graduate students from Parsons and from New School for Social Research to Warsaw to study yet another set of challenges and topics connected to wounded places. We will be studying a wounded place in a wounded place, and by this I mean Poland's Warsaw Palace of Culture. We'll be really thinking about the trajectories and the dynamics between iconic architecture, production and erosion of meaning, and politics around that. So we're very much looking forward to it. I can see some of our students in the audience, which is great. So this complex project of reflection, if you will, is built around wounded places. We defined it so many times in many materials that I'm not going to elaborate on that. But it was our aim to really facilitate this rich conversation, and I have a particularly delightful task to now thank everyone who made this happen. So I'm going to start with mentioning our supporters, funders, and great friends from the campus program at the Adam Mickiewicz Institute in Poland. Also Armenian General Benevolent Union and Arte East, and I would like to thank you for your support. We also want to thank all the speakers and the moderators who came from Europe, Latin America, and the US, and our very New York, and who will be generously contributing to the 2 days of our interactions. Finally, I would like to remind us all that the symposium is co-sponsored by the MA Design Studies program at Parsons, the Global Studies program at the New School, and the Trans-Regional Center for Democratic Studies at the New School for Social Research. Without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Susan Yelavich, the director of the MA Design Studies program, dear colleague and friend, and the co-organizer of the symposium. Susan.
Thank you, Malgo. Good morning. Good to see you all. As Malgo said, I'm Susan Yelavich, and I'm her partner in crime in all but the exhibition. The exhibition is totally Malgo's, and it doesn't open till noon. But don't miss it. It's not just these photos in the hallway. It's the glass gallery on Fifth Avenue. It's extremely interesting. So I want to echo, of course, Malgo's thanks, but I won't repeat them. That will take away too much precious time. But I do want to last night I was talking to Jay Saloom, one of our participants, an artist in the show, and I realized in talking to him that not everybody intuits what we take for granted here, and that is that the New School is the university of which Parsons is one part, the New School for Social Research is another part, and the School of Public Engagement and Global Studies is another arena. There's a college for performing arts. There's an undergraduate school called Lang. But in case anybody's wondering where they are in the university, you are at the New School. You happen to be in a Parsons room. But this is representative of how the culture works at the New School. The collaboration with social research across the platform of the New School goes on all the time. This happens, I mean, we would do a design studies seminar anyway, but when Malgo came to me with this project and the Adam Mickiewicz Institute came and said, we want to bring students to Warsaw, I thought, well, there's no reason why we shouldn't do it together. Of course we will. So now you know where you're situated. I want to thank my dean, Sarah Lawrence, I don't think she's here yet, for her support in the School of Art, Design, History, and Theory. So to add to the layers, in Parsons there are different schools. We're the history and theory folks. And of course, my colleagues in design studies, Clive Dilnott, who you'll meet later, Jilly Tragano, who you meet later, and Caroline Dion, who you'll meet very soon. And I want to thank all the students who helped out, and in particular, Kayla O'Daniel, who did all our graphics. Thank you, Kayla. Big shout out to you. Okay. Now, excuse me, design as damage, erasure, repair, and/or renewal is a mouthful. It may seem a little bit overwrought for what's meant to be a brief framing for the next 2 days. But in the context of wounded spaces, it's particularly important that design is all of these things. Damage, erasure, repair, renewal, sometimes separately, more often simultaneously. That is why we in design studies take vows for better or worse. It's an article of faith that design, that by which we make the world, is as frail and as brave as we are. So while, oops, what happened? Leticia, what did I do? Oh, no, the screen here changed. Up there it didn't. Good. Okay, I don't know what's going on. I've got to be careful not to hit the, I'm one of those generationally challenged people. I'm afraid if I touch something, it magically just evaporates. So if you see me go like, that's what that's about. Okay, so design is all these things, for better or worse, blah, blah, blah. So while much of what you're going to see over the next few days is evidence of courage, it is equally important to understand the dynamic of destructive creation that operates in designing and living with design. Given that this is an interdisciplinary gathering, it seems only right to turn to a sociologist to elaborate on this dynamic, specifically the much-mourned late Zygmunt Bauman. He died just this past January. In the first chapter of his book, Wasted Lives, damningly titled In the Beginning Was Design, Bauman identifies two models of design, two models of creation, which in turn he borrows from the urbanist and sociologist Lewis Mumford. So we couldn't be more incestuous here. To be specific, Bauman draws on Mumford's allegory of design as mining and design as farming. Mining, which operates on the principles of extraction, radical extraction, is equated with design understood as the solution. And farming, which operates on the principle of replenishment, is equated with design as a solution. Given the unacceptable levels of waste that come from subtraction, the hallmark of modernism, Bauman makes the case that, quote, only excessive designing, a surplus of design, may salvage the design process as a whole, compensating for the unavoidable fallibility of each of its parts and stages. By which I understand him to mean that design is least wasteful if we understand it as a work of iteration, modification, and negotiation. In this scenario, design becomes a cultivation process in which ideas, materials, and experiences retain their value even if they're not immediately relevant in the present or to the specific issue at hand, which is another way of saying that because design is social, it is a matter of both time and space. No news to anybody here. And by extension, memories. Memories which are ignored, or as Bauman might say, wasted, are lost, we lose them at our peril. These memories are as much the material of design as are pixels, bricks, and mortar. And of course, the paradox of even the most considered design is that it always prefigures memory. By virtue of altering the environment, design changes our experience of the world and in unpredictable ways compounds the memories we will make. At its best, design then is a reorientation to time and space, not its obliteration. But I did take that vow, for better or worse, so I can't ignore that obliteration is a deeply ingrained in the nature of design. After all, our origin story is profoundly linked to utopian modernism, which, as we all know, has made and continues to make countless sacrifices at the altar of progress. Okay, so case in point, the green bullets developed by the US Army, which I borrowed from the Museum of Modern Art's online exhibition, Design and Violence, or Design as Violence, as it came to be known. It was co-curated by my dear friends and colleagues, Jamer Hunt and Paola Antonelli, precisely to expose the dark side of design, not to valorize it. Hence these bullets. They're called green because their design, quote, swaps out the traditional hard lead core for copper, ensuring that bullets do not contaminate the food chain or water supply, just their intended target, end quote. This is the worst kind of Pyrrhic victory. Conversely, the drone was designed, at least in part, to prevent the waste of lives, pilots' lives, but with no consideration for the lives, livelihoods, and homes taken by drones. And I'll say more on that in a few minutes. Of course, in military parlance, this is a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle. Note how important language is. Caroline and I talk about this a lot to design. Unmanned aerial vehicle sounds as innocent as driverless car. Well, if not innocent, then only vaguely menacing, non-specifically menacing. Technocratic acronyms like UAV, SCUD, IED mask their relationship to killing and help normalize it. How we name our wounding instruments, and our wounded places will be an important strand in the conversations to come. A final point about drones. It's now well known that launching an attack from a distance doesn't spare a soldier from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The brain isn't protected by geography. Apparently, the deployment of drones manufactures different kinds of memories. Memories of the unseen, which is something that Sarkissian, for those of you who were here last night, talked about beautifully. Now, with Erasure, we move from design object to design process. It's commonplace in architecture that buildings are bound to a cycle of replacement. Very few escape it. What you're looking at here is a high-rise building split perfectly in half by a controlled explosion. There is something of a magician's act in this staggered two-part demolition. Usually a building goes up in a big cloud of dust in these scenarios. That's what we're used to seeing. Seeing the process staged this way, I find downright spooky. It literally foreshadows the fate of so much of what we design. Of course, the other half of the building did come down to make way for an indoor theme park, a 5-star hotel, a hypermarket, and an office block. Now, is this a case of Schumpeter's famous theory of creative destruction, where innovation rises like a phoenix from the rubble? Or is it a case of so-called innovation producing destruction, making room for yet another mammoth commercial establishment that will accelerate consumption and produce much more waste? In most cases like this, waste wins. Waste equals profits. Now, for those who think I'm ignoring the elephant in the room, namely our wounded, ununited states, I offer you this. Look at the quote at the top. I came home from work a couple weeks ago and turned on BBC America, which is the news source I use to get something slightly more global. It's biased as well, of course. But so I heard they were interviewing a woman named Diana Bartlett about the promises made to West Virginia's coal community by this new administration. She looked directly at the camera and said, the day after the election, it was like we won the Civil War. And I just thought, wow. Americans are so fond of, saying things like, well, how can they fight in the Balkans? That was 1400. Well, we'll be fighting our Civil War for centuries as well. But nonetheless, old wounds have been reopened. More ground is being lost, quite literally. Never mind that he who must not be named is a Yankee vis-a-vis the Civil War, and even worse, a New Yorker. Never mind that burning coal is environmentally devastating and it's not likely to make a comeback anytime soon, no matter what's said. But what is important here is that Diana Barnett, a spokesman for the industry in West Virginia, feels that, whether true or not, she and her community's history and its way of life have been recognized. The dignity of recognition is something we all desire, underscoring the point that the fight for environmental justice can't ignore social justice. This is where design for social innovation has tremendous challenges and opportunities. Just last week, Ezio Manzini was in town, and I don't know how many of you know Ezio, but he's a highly regarded thinker and activist in the realm of social innovation and sustainability, and he works with one of our guest speakers, Virginia Tassinari, and he helped found this Desis Labs, one of which is here at Parsons. Anyway, that morning, Ezio reminded me, he was despairing of the politics, and he said, there are so many initiatives by designers that are anti-globalization, that do take the side of the marginalized, if you will, or the people who feel disenfranchised, but they're invisible. They're invisible because of this wave of global nationalisms that we're experiencing. Their voices, their actions, whether it's a matter working on aging or working on food production, it's just swept aside. So one of the projects of design might be to amplify these grassroots projects and magnify the presence of the work that all of our presenters are going to be showing you at this conference. And this is a thread we'll pick up this afternoon with Virginia and Clive. Okay, repair. With the work of forensic architecture, we pivot towards a more constructive view of design, figuratively speaking at any rate. Here we are looking at a project that was conducted in Germany but has its origins in Pakistan. With the help of forensic architecture's activists, there's a woman in the middle of that top left slide. This woman is recreating a detailed digital model of her home that was destroyed by a drone, down to the rug and the bed. I apologize, these aren't great slides. I think they're slides taken from screens, right? But it was done with uncanny accuracy. You could see the pattern on the rug. And this is more than a retrospective active witness. The lifelike renderings of these furnishings restore what is lost to a surrogate reality. And though her home is restored with pixels instead of stone, its reconstruction is nonetheless affecting. Drone strikes are rarely photographed, much less their consequences, and this project makes them visible. Beyond mere image making, forensic architecture is making a horror consigned to memory or consigned to oblivion newly apprehensible. Here we see a project by Jan Vorman, a Berlin-based artist. Vorman addresses and dresses the wounds of a damaged building or damaged buildings with an approach to repair that elicits the uncanny. By wedging a mirror or mirrors in these irregular forms, wounds in these buildings, he conveys the sense that something happened here before, that this corner is absent but still filled. and specifically with a presence, my presence, even if it's only a reflection of my legs. Actually, they're not my legs, they're somebody else's, but nonetheless. Since one sees oneself in and on this place, perhaps we too are implicated in its history. The Reichstag. Who would have thought we'd be looking to the Reichstag as a beacon of hope? No more than most of us would have thought we'd be counting on lawyers and civil servants as forces of resistance. To the point of design as renewal, the decision not to tear down this history-freighted 1894 Reichstag building, but instead create this rather ungainly hybrid, as awkward as all reconciliations invariably are, that decision was, to my mind, a wise one. Conceptually, at least, no matter what you think of Norman Foster's edition, we were getting closer to the Bauman-Mumford notion of design as farming, returning something to a site, not simply discarding it and its history altogether. Repair, of course, can be less formal and less officious, as it is in the work of landscape designer Gilles Clement. Clement is also the author of The Third Landscape, a manifesto that calls for leaving the sum of space left over by man to landscape evolution on its own. And where there is no growth, Clement will literally seed it, as he has done here. But then he lets it evolve. This, too, is an interesting model for design as catalyst, rather than as a means to a predetermined end. And, and because my predetermined end, this should have been the end of my litany, it seemed a little bit short. I've added another property for design, amelioration. Here we see one of the most quietly powerful architectural responses to the rites of grieving, Gunnar Asplin's Woodside Cemetery in Stockholm. It withdraws into the landscape. At the same time, it offers a place in which to locate the rituals of mourning. Those so inclined can avail themselves of the shelter of the portico, or they can simply walk the grounds. Now, in places like Mexico City, the living have a far more active relationship with the dead. The important design actions happen on that day, the Day of the Dead, when families dress their relatives' tombstones with exuberant cut paper decorations and brilliant orange flowers, all as ephemeral as the living who gather to talk and share stories. This is design at its most basic. It may not be fashionable to talk about things like color when design has more important work, like attending to broken schools, broken prisons, broken government. But sometimes the smallest gestures will suffice, and the smallest things are filled with an unexpected poignancy. So the poet tells us. And I leave you with these words about waste, mortality, and things once designed from the Nobel Prize-winning Polish poet Wisława Szymborska. So, this is a poem she wrote called The End and the Beginning. After every war, someone has to tidy up. Things won't pick themselves up after all. Someone has to shove the rubble to the roadsides so the carts loaded with corpses can get by. Someone has to trudge through sludge and ashes, through the sofa springs, the shards of glass, the bloody rags. Someone has to lug the post to prop the wall. Someone has to glaze the window, set the door in its frame. No sound bites, no photo opportunities, and it takes years. All the cameras have gone on to other wars. The bridges need to be rebuilt, the railroad stations too. Shirt sleeves will be rolled to shreds. Someone, broom in hand, still remembers how it was. Someone else listens, nodding his unshattered head. But others are bound to be bustling nearby who will find all that a bit boring. From time to time, someone still must dig up a rusted argument from underneath a bush and haul it off to the dump. Those who knew what this was all about must make way for those who know little and less than that. And at last, nothing less than nothing. Someone has to be there, has to lie there in the grass that covers up the causes and effects with a cornstalk in his teeth, gawking at the clouds. So, with that both very complex amalgam of past and present, I turn the microphone over to Caroline.